I sacrificed my career to save my dad's restaurant after his heart attack, but he planned to leave everything to my sister who lives in another state. When she confirmed she'd sell it, I found a new job and left my dad scrambling to keep the business running. I never thought I'd be writing this after another 14-hour shift, trying to make sense of what happened today. I need outside perspective because I might be going crazy. I'm Andrew, 29M, and this is about my family's Italian restaurant in a small town in Ohio. My dad Tony, 58M, opened this place 22 years ago when I was 7. My sister Isabella, 32F, lives in Chicago with her husband and 2 kids, working as a marketing manager for some big company. Let me give you the full background because it matters. When I was 23, I had just finished my business degree and was working at a bank in Columbus. The plan was to stay there, maybe get into investment banking, live the corporate life. Then Dad had his first heart attack. It happened on a busy Saturday night. Mom called me crying, saying Dad collapsed in the kitchen during dinner rush. The doctors said he needed surgery and months of recovery. The restaurant would have to close unless someone could run it. Isabella couldn't help. She had just gotten married and was pregnant with her first kid. She lived 4 hours away and had her own career. So I quit my job and moved back home to keep the restaurant going. Those first few months were brutal. I had no idea how to run a restaurant. Dad tried to help from his hospital bed, giving me instructions over the phone while I fumbled through orders and inventory. I burned through 3 different cooks in 2 months. I worked 7 days a week, opening at 11 a.m. and closing at 10 p.m., then going home to do paperwork until midnight. But slowly, I figured it out. I learned how to manage staff, deal with suppliers, handle the books. I even learned some cooking from our head chef Maria, who's been with us since the beginning. Dad recovered enough to come back part-time after 6 months, but by then I was essentially running everything. That was 6 years ago. Dad still comes in most days, but mostly he sits at the corner table, drinks coffee, and chats with regular customers. His health isn't great, he's had 2 more minor heart episodes since then, and his doctor says stress could kill him. So I handle all the real work. I manage the staff of 12 people. I do all the ordering, inventory, scheduling, payroll, taxes, health department inspections, equipment maintenance. I redesigned the menu, set up our online ordering system, got us on all the delivery apps. I work 70 to 80 hours a week. The restaurant barely breaks even most months, but it pays Dad's medical bills and gives him something to live for. Isabella visits maybe 3 times a year. Christmas, Dad's birthday, and usually one random weekend in summer. She's nice enough when she's here, helps serve tables for a few hours, takes pictures for her Instagram. The kids love their grandpa and the customers always fuss over them. But she's never worked a real shift, never dealt with a crisis, never had to fire someone or negotiate with suppliers or figure out why the walk-in cooler died on the hottest day of the year. Her life in Chicago sounds pretty good. Her husband makes decent money as an engineer. They own a nice house in the suburbs. She posts pictures of family vacations and new cars. Meanwhile, I live in the apartment above the restaurant and drive a 12-year-old Honda. I don't resent this exactly. I chose to come back. I could have left any time. But the restaurant has become my life's work. I've poured everything into it. So today, Dad and I were going over some paperwork in his little office behind the kitchen. He mentioned he was updating his will and wanted to discuss something important with me. I figured he wanted to talk about the restaurant's future, maybe make me an official partner or something. We'd never really discussed ownership, I just assumed since I was running everything, eventually it would be mine. Instead, he told me he was leaving the entire restaurant to Isabella. I must have looked confused because he kept talking, explaining his reasoning. He said Isabella has kids to think about and needs the financial security more than I do. He said I'm young and capable, that I'll be fine whatever happens. He said the restaurant could be Isabella's kids' college fund. I asked what would happen to me, to my job, to the life I'd built here. He said Isabella would probably want to keep me as manager, that she'd need someone who knows how to run things. I pointed out that Isabella lives in Chicago and has never shown any interest in actually working here. He waved that off, saying she could hire someone to help or maybe sell it if running it long distance got too complicated. Sell it. 6 years of my life, and he was casually mentioning selling it like it was nothing. I asked if he'd discussed this with Isabella. He said no, he wanted to talk to me first since I'd be affected. He asked if I thought it was fair. Fair. I worked every holiday for 6 years while Isabella was in Chicago. I haven't taken a real vacation since I moved back. I've sacrificed relationships, career opportunities, my own life plans. And he was asking if it was fair to give everything to someone who shows up 3 times a year. I didn't know what to say. I told him I needed time to think about it. He seemed surprised that I wasn't immediately supportive. He said he thought I'd understand, that family looks out for each other. I left the office and finished my shift on autopilot. Smiled at customers, counted the till, locked up like normal. But my hands were shaking the whole time. Here's what I can't get past: I understand wanting to help Isabella and her kids. But why does helping her mean giving away my entire life? I've worked here longer than I worked anywhere else. I know every supplier, every regular customer, every quirk of every piece of equipment. This place runs on my labor and knowledge. And if Isabella does sell, which seems likely since she can't run it from Chicago and probably doesn't want to move back to small-town Ohio, then what was the point of everything I've done? 6 years of 80-hour weeks so she can get a lump sum payout? Maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe this is just how family businesses work and I was naive to expect anything different. Isabella didn't ask to be born first or to have kids who need college funds. I chose to come back when Dad got sick. But I also didn't choose to stay just to preserve an asset for someone else to cash out. I keep thinking about what Dad said, that Isabella would probably want to keep me as manager. Like I should be grateful for the chance to keep working for someone else in the place I've been running for years. Like my contribution was just labor, not building something. The worst part is that I can't even be mad at Isabella. She doesn't know about any of this yet. She's living her life in Chicago, probably not thinking about the restaurant except when Dad posts pictures on Facebook. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. Do I just accept this and hope Isabella is generous if she inherits? Do I try to convince Dad to change his mind? Do I start looking for other jobs now, before I waste more years building something that will never be mine? Has anyone dealt with something like this in their family? I feel like I'm going crazy thinking about this. Maybe I'm being entitled and this is just how inheritance works. Or maybe I have a right to be upset about giving 6 years of my life to make someone else's retirement fund. I just need to know if I'm losing my mind here. Update 1: I want to thank everyone who commented on my original post. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't crazy for being upset about this situation. A lot of you suggested I have a calm conversation with my dad, so that's what I tried to do. 3 weeks have passed since Dad first told me about his will plans. I spent that time really thinking about what I wanted to say and how to approach it. I didn't want to seem like I was throwing a tantrum or being greedy. I wanted to have an adult conversation about the future of the restaurant and my role in it. Last Tuesday, I asked Dad if we could talk privately after we closed. I had prepared what I wanted to say, trying to be respectful but honest about how his decision affected me. I started by acknowledging that I understood his desire to help Isabella and her family. I said I wasn't trying to take anything away from her, but I wanted him to consider what would actually happen to the restaurant under his current plan. I explained that Isabella couldn't realistically run the restaurant from Chicago. She has a full-time job, 2 young kids, and a life there. Even if she wanted to be involved, the day-to-day management of a restaurant requires someone to be physically present. You can't handle a kitchen fire or a health inspector visit or a staff walkout via video call. I told him that if Isabella inherited the restaurant, the most practical thing for her to do would be to sell it. That would mean the end of the family business he'd spent 22 years building. It would mean all the regular customers who become like family, all the staff who depend on their jobs, all of it would disappear so Isabella could have a lump sum of money. Dad got defensive immediately. He said I was being dramatic and that Isabella wouldn't just sell the family business. He said she understood how important the restaurant was to him and she'd find a way to make it work. I asked if he'd actually talked to Isabella about this. He admitted he hadn't, but said he was sure she'd want to keep it in the family. Then I brought up my own situation. I explained that for 6 years, I'd put my entire life on hold to keep this place running. I'd missed out on career advancement, on starting my own family, on all the things people my age usually do. I'd done this because I thought I was building something for my future, not just preserving an asset for someone else. This is where the conversation went bad. Dad's voice got louder and he said some things that really stung. He said I was being selfish and ungrateful. He said that when family needs help, you help them, period. You don't keep score and you don't expect payment. He said Isabella deserved security for her children and that I was young enough to start over somewhere else if I didn't like the arrangement. He said I was acting like I was entitled to something that was never promised to me. The worst part was when he said that my mom, who died when I was 15, would be disappointed in how I was acting. He said she always taught us that family comes first and here I was trying to take away from my sister's children. I tried to stay calm but it was hard. I pointed out that I'd already put family first for 6 years. I'd given up my own plans to save the restaurant when he got sick. But apparently that only counted when it was convenient for him. Dad said that was different, that was just helping out during an emergency. He said the will was about the long-term future and Isabella needed the asset more than I did. I asked him again if he'd spoken to Isabella about whether she actually wanted to own a restaurant. He got annoyed and said it didn't matter what she wanted right now, it mattered what was best for her family's future. The conversation ended with him telling me that his decision was final and I needed to accept it. He said if I couldn't handle working here knowing the restaurant would go to Isabella eventually, then maybe I should think about what I really wanted to do with my life. I've been thinking about that a lot since then. The thing is, I do know what I want to do with my life. I want to run this restaurant. I want to grow it, maybe expand to catering or open a second location. I have ideas and plans and the experience to make them work. But I can't do any of that if I'm just an employee who could be replaced whenever the actual owner decides to sell. Since our conversation, things have been tense between Dad and me. We still work together every day, but he's been cold and formal. He's been making comments to the staff about how he built this place from nothing and some people don't appreciate what they have. I've been doing my job the same as always, but I'll admit I've started thinking about other options. There's a restaurant group in Columbus that's been trying to recruit me for months. They offered me a general manager position at one of their locations with a real salary and benefits and profit sharing. I never seriously considered it before because I thought I had a future here. Now I'm wondering if I've been fooling myself. The hardest part is that I still love this place. I love the regular customers who ask about my day and remember my birthday. I love training new staff and seeing them grow. I love the rush of a busy Saturday night when everything clicks and we're operating like a machine. But I'm starting to realize that loving something doesn't mean you get to keep it. I haven't talked to Isabella yet. Dad made it clear he wants to handle the conversation himself when he's ready. But I'm curious what she'd actually say if she knew about this plan. Would she want the responsibility? Would she even want to own something she's never really been part of? I guess I'll find out eventually. In the meantime, I'm updating my resume for the first time in 6 years. It feels wrong, like I'm betraying something. But maybe Dad's right. Maybe I do need to think about what I really want to do with my life. Maybe what I want and what I can actually have are two different things. Update 2: Isabella came to visit last weekend for Dad's birthday. I decided this was my chance to get some answers about the whole inheritance situation. I waited until Sunday morning when Dad had gone to early mass and Isabella was having coffee in the restaurant before her family headed back to Chicago. Her husband was outside loading their car and the kids were running around the dining room. I sat down with her and said I needed to talk to her about something important. I told her about Dad's plan to leave the restaurant to her in his will. Her reaction was not what I expected. She looked genuinely surprised and asked if I was sure. I told her Dad had been pretty clear about it. She said he'd never mentioned anything like this to her. Then I asked the question I'd been wondering about for months: what would she actually do if she inherited the restaurant? Isabella was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that confirmed my worst fears. She said there was no way she could run a restaurant from Chicago. Her life is there, her kids' schools, her husband's job, everything. She said the most realistic option would probably be to sell it and use the money for her kids' college funds. Just like I thought. 6 years of my life so she could cash out. But then she said something that surprised me. She asked why Dad would want to do this when I was the one actually running everything. She said it seemed unfair to give the restaurant to someone who couldn't use it when I'd been working there all these years. I explained Dad's reasoning about her having kids who needed financial security. Isabella made a face and said that while she appreciated Dad wanting to help her family, she'd never asked for that help and didn't want it to come at my expense. She asked if I'd tried talking to Dad about changing his mind. I told her about our conversation and how he'd made it clear his decision was final. Isabella shook her head and said that sounded like Dad, stubborn as always. Then she said something that gave me hope. She said that if Dad went through with this plan and she did inherit the restaurant, she'd want to work something out with me. Maybe sell it to me for a fair price, or make me a partner, something that recognized my contribution. I thanked her for saying that, but I also pointed out a problem. If she inherited the restaurant, she'd probably need to sell it quickly to avoid the tax burden and ongoing expenses. She wouldn't have the luxury of working out a special deal with me, especially if I couldn't come up with the money to buy her out right away. Isabella hadn't thought about the tax implications. She asked how much the restaurant might be worth and I gave her my estimate based on what similar businesses had sold for in our area. Her eyes got wide when she realized she'd be looking at a significant tax bill on the inheritance. We talked for another 20 minutes before her husband came in to say they needed to leave. Isabella said she wanted to think about everything and maybe talk to Dad herself. She hugged me goodbye and said she was sorry this whole situation was so complicated. She said she never wanted to be the reason I lost something I'd worked so hard for. After they left, I felt better and worse at the same time. Better because Isabella seemed to understand the unfairness of the situation and genuinely cared about finding a solution. Worse, because her response confirmed that Dad's plan would definitely result in the restaurant being sold. Tuesday morning, Dad asked me to stay after we closed because he wanted to talk. I thought maybe Isabella had called him about our conversation. Instead, he told me he'd been thinking about our argument from a few weeks ago. He said he realized I might have valid concerns about the restaurant's future under Isabella's ownership. For a moment, I thought he might be changing his mind. Then he offered what he clearly thought was a compromise. He said he'd been considering splitting the restaurant 50-50 between Isabella and me in his will. I asked him if he'd thought through what that would actually mean. With two owners who disagreed about the restaurant's future, Isabella could force a sale anytime she wanted. The courts would side with her right to liquidate her asset. We'd end up selling anyway, just with more legal complications. Dad looked confused, like he hadn't considered this possibility. I explained that partial ownership of a business only works when both owners want the same thing. If one person wants to sell and the other wants to keep operating, the person who wants to sell usually wins. He asked what I thought would be a fair solution. I said the fair thing would be to leave the restaurant to the person who'd been running it and had plans to continue running it. If he wanted to help Isabella financially, there might be other ways to do that. Dad got quiet and said he needed to think about it more. He asked me not to discuss this with Isabella until he'd had a chance to talk to her himself. But it was too late for that. Yesterday afternoon, Isabella called the restaurant. Dad answered and they talked for almost an hour. I could hear his voice getting louder from the kitchen. When he hung up, he looked shaken. He said Isabella had told him she couldn't possibly run the restaurant from Chicago and would have to sell it if she inherited it. She'd also mentioned the tax implications, which he apparently hadn't considered. Dad sat down heavily in his chair and asked me if I really thought Isabella would sell the restaurant. I said yes, and reminded him that she'd told me exactly that just a few days ago. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he needed to think about what was best for everyone, not just Isabella. It's been 2 days since then and he hasn't brought it up again. But I can tell he's thinking about it. He's been watching me work differently, like he's seeing me for the first time. Yesterday he commented on how smoothly I handled a problem with a food delivery, and this morning he asked my opinion about changing one of our suppliers. I don't know if this means he's reconsidering his plan or just feeling guilty about it. Either way, I've started seriously looking at other job opportunities. I can't keep living in limbo, waiting to find out if I have a future here. The restaurant group in Columbus is still interested in hiring me. They've offered to let me visit their operations and see what the job would actually involve. I'm planning to drive up there next week on my day off. It feels like everything is coming to a head. Either Dad changes his mind about the will, or I need to start planning my exit from this place I've called home for 6 years. I just hope I make the right choice, whatever that turns out to be. Update 3. It's been 6 weeks since my last update and a lot has happened. I'm not sure if this story has a happy ending, but it definitely has an ending. 3 weeks ago, I drove to Columbus to meet with the restaurant group that had been trying to recruit me. They offered me a position as general manager of their new location with a salary that's almost double what I could afford to pay myself from our restaurant. They also offered health insurance, paid vacation, and a path to eventual ownership if I proved myself. The job would start in 2 months, giving me time to transition out of my current role. I told them I needed a week to think about it. When I got back home, Dad was waiting for me. He asked where I'd been all day. I'd told him I was taking a personal day but hadn't mentioned the job interview. I decided to be honest. I told him about the job offer. His face went through several expressions: surprise, hurt, anger, then something that looked like panic. He asked if I was seriously considering leaving the restaurant. I said yes, I was. I explained that I couldn't keep working here knowing I had no real future, that I was essentially preserving an asset for someone else to sell. Dad got very upset. He said I was abandoning him, that I was being selfish and disloyal. He brought up all the years he'd put into building the restaurant, how he trusted me to help him keep it running. I reminded him that I had helped him keep it running, for 6 years, but that apparently didn't earn me any stake in its future. I said I wasn't abandoning him, his own plan was to give the restaurant to someone who would sell it anyway. That's when he finally called Isabella and put her on speakerphone. He asked her directly what she would do if she inherited the restaurant. Isabella, to her credit, was completely honest. She said she couldn't run it from Chicago and would have to sell it, probably within the first year to handle the tax obligations. Dad hung up and stared at me for a long time. Then he asked why I hadn't told him sooner that Isabella planned to sell. I pointed out that I had told him, multiple times, but he hadn't wanted to believe it. We didn't talk for the rest of that week. The atmosphere in the restaurant was tense. Staff members started asking if everything was okay. Dad was short with customers and made several mistakes with orders. Last Wednesday, Dad asked me to meet him at the restaurant early, before we opened. When I got there, he had paperwork spread across one of the dining tables. He said he'd been thinking about everything and realized he'd made a mistake with his inheritance plan. He said he'd never considered that Isabella would sell the restaurant, and that giving it to her would mean destroying everything he'd built. Then he showed me what was on the table. New will documents that left the restaurant entirely to me. I asked about Isabella and her kids. Dad said he'd talked to her again and they'd worked out a different arrangement. He had some savings and a life insurance policy that he could designate for Isabella's family. It wouldn't be as much as selling the restaurant would bring, but it would still help with college expenses. He asked if this changed my mind about the job in Columbus. I told him I'd already accepted their offer. He looked devastated. I explained that the damage was done. For 6 years, I'd worked here thinking I was building something for my future. Finding out that my work was just preserving an asset for someone else to cash out had changed how I saw everything. Even with the new will, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was expendable. Dad asked what it would take to get me to stay. I said I didn't know if anything could at this point. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. He spent the next 2 weeks trying to convince me to change my mind. He offered to make me an official partner immediately, not just in his will. He offered to put my name on the deed and the business license. He even offered to step back completely and let me run everything my way. But I'd already started mentally preparing for my new life. I'd found an apartment in Columbus. I'd been excited about working for a company that valued my skills enough to actively recruit me. Last week, I gave my official notice. 2 weeks from now, I'll be starting my new job. Dad has been scrambling to find someone to replace me. He's discovered that hiring a qualified restaurant manager costs about 3 times what he'd been paying me, and that's if he can find someone good. Most of the candidates he's interviewed don't have half my experience. Yesterday, he made one final appeal. He said he finally understood how much I'd been contributing and how little he'd been valuing it. He said he was sorry for taking me for granted and for planning to give away my life's work. It was a good apology. But apologies don't erase 6 years of feeling undervalued, or the shock of learning that all my work was never really mine. I start my new job on Monday. Dad will keep the restaurant running somehow, though I'm not sure how. Maybe he'll find someone good to manage it. Maybe he'll finally have to sell it himself. Isabella called me last night to wish me luck with the new job. She said she was sorry about how everything worked out, but that she thought I was making the right choice for myself. That's the thing about family businesses, they're complicated in ways that regular jobs aren't. When your workplace is also your family legacy, it's hard to separate professional decisions from personal relationships. I don't regret the 6 years I spent here. I learned a lot and I'm proud of what I accomplished. But I also learned that good intentions and family loyalty aren't enough if the fundamental structure is unfair. Maybe someday Dad and I will rebuild our relationship. Maybe I'll even come back to visit and see how the restaurant is doing under new management. But right now, I'm looking forward to starting fresh somewhere that my work will be valued from day one. The restaurant will survive or it won't. That's not my problem anymore. This feels like the end of a chapter rather than the end of the whole story. I'm 29 years old and I'm finally going to find out what I can accomplish when I'm working for myself instead of preserving someone else's legacy. I think I'm going to like it.